From breakthrough devices to the bottom line, we explore the investment trends, the commercial models, and the strategic thinking required to bring neurotechnology to the global market. This is the Business of Neurotech. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. My name's Adam Fraser. I'm your host, and today I'm joined by Dr. Amy Kruse. Amy is General Partner and CIO at Satori Neuro. Amy's a visionary leader who transitioned from managing groundbreaking neuroscience programs at DARPA to becoming a pivotal force in the growth of the neurotech community today. Amy, a huge welcome to the Business of Neurotech podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
You are the perfect guest, the first name that comes to mind in the exciting, emerging, burgeoning neurotech sector. So lots to get through.
Absolutely.
I want to get straight into it, Amy. So you will undoubtedly be known by many people listening to this podcast, but for those that don't, or maybe those that don't know everything about your kind of journey, just ease us in. Tell us your backstory, your career to date, and how you ultimately ended up at Satori, where you are today.
Absolutely. If you want me to, it depends how far back you want me to start. But actually, I was sort of born a little bit of a scientist. I always wanted to, sort of discover the natural world, always very curious. And so I actually ended up in biology. And then, about halfway through undergrad, kind of had my first experience with neuroscience and the brain and essentially fell in love. I fell in love with the brain, both because it's sort of the, genesis of all of our behaviors and thoughts and feelings and everything, but also because I was like, this is so complex. I could work on it forever. It seemed like job security at the time, to work on the brain. And so I loved it so much. I went into graduate school and got my PhD in neuroscience. And before the end of graduate school, I realized that I didn't want to be an academic, which was not particularly popular at the time, particularly to tell your advisors and other folks that had supported you through that journey. And that's actually how I ended up in the DC area and working with DARPA. I had a colleague in the lab who had moved out to DC and was starting to work with the Department of Defense and DARPA in particular. And he said, hey, they're looking for neuroscientists. And I was like, what do they want to do with neuroscientists? What could that possibly be? And so that kind of began my DARPA journey. I started, first as a consultant and then worked my way into being a government program manager there for 5 years. Led and ran a whole range of programs using neuroscience for human performance. So accelerated learning and training, preventing sleep deprivation, complex decision-making in high-stress environments, all the things we, still talk about today. DARPA is term limited. So you actually have to leave. You actually have a badge that has like a number on it. That's like an expiration date. So I was there for 5 years. And then after I left, there was no neurotechnology industry to go to. I was like, we're still in the process of creating this space. I mean, I was super excited about what we had invested in, but it wasn't a thing yet. So I stayed in the DoD world, eventually went to a small business through an acquisition, became the chief technology officer of a global defense company, Cubic Global Defense, which is how I spent so much time with my Aussie friends. And then, honestly, at the end of that journey, two things. One is I loved that work. Obviously, it was very mission driven, but nothing was happening on the neuroscience and brain side in the government and the military. And I was like, clearly the next thing that needs to happen is this needs to be commercialized. It just seemed like a logical thing to me. I was like, well, I tried it this way. I tried it that way. I tried it this way. So I became an entrepreneur. I was a co-founder of a startup working in applied neuroscience for human performance. And I was like, this is what we need to do, And then, eventually, when I left that startup, I was approached by our largest investor to join their fund. It was a deep tech fund. I was first a partner and then a general partner. And it also, to me, was very logical, right? In terms of commercialization, especially as it related to neurotech, I was like, more capital needs to flow into this space. And so also I thought perhaps my, skills would be useful in this space. And so eventually, about 3 years ago, ended up as the, general partner and founding CIO of Satori Neuro, which is a venture fund that's focused on mental health, brain health, and neurotechnology, all under what I call the umbrella of human flourishing, because obviously there are a lot of clinical things to work on, but I still have my little human performance, heart, beating inside of me that someday we'll be able to use these technologies for more than just clinical outcomes. So.
Great stuff. Yeah. What a great journey. Lots to unpack, and we will jump back and forward to different components of that.
And I always tell people I didn't plan any of that. That was not.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Most career paths, I look at my own career path, is sort of unpredictable and surprising pivots. Then you come back on track. But yours is actually a surprisingly logical. It appears to be very well planned. Maybe it wasn't at the time.
I didn't plan it, but I was following a logical thread. I feel like because I feel like I threw myself like a really long football pass, American football, of course, pass into the future, because I was like, oh, these things that I was doing at DARPA, even though they were a while ago, right? They are related, to the things that I'm looking at now.
So let's go back to DARPA. Then I will probably skip a few roles and I want to get into Satori and what you're investing in and your observations on the market today. But it's funny, researching for this pod, obviously looking back at the programs you ran at DARPA, and sitting in 2026, I'm optimization, memory, decision making, agility, sleep, focus. Then I'm like, oh my God, this was 2008. Like it appears very ahead of its time with hindsight. Was it almost too early? Like, what sort of adoption downstream did you get from the program?
It was too early. Yeah. It was too early. And it was too early not because the science didn't bear out, or the observations or things that we didn't bear out. There were two things that I think were the biggest obstacles. One was, at the time, the hardware itself was still a bit clunky. So, there are pictures somewhere online of like soldiers running around with like EEG headsets and like backpacks and like, so like we were making do with the best that we had, at the time, which was still pretty bulky. And we hadn't yet, I always say that now neurotechnology has benefited from, the sort of microsystems and microtechnology revolution. At the time, we really hadn't leveraged all of that. The second thing about the lack of adoption was it was really hard for people to wrap their head around where these might fit into, military training systems. And so, it was not a lack of outcomes. It was more a lack of like, wow, how does somebody put this in an RFP for a training system that somebody then responds to, So it was a little bit of mismatch, which was why, by the way, I got to my logical conclusion around commercialization and said, if they could buy it, then, somebody with a credit card, like I wouldn't have to go through this cumbersome government procurement system and try to get it into some RFP that wouldn't actualize for 10 years. If it was a system that somebody could buy, eventually somebody could just implement it. So
sure.
Yeah.
It's where you first cut your teeth post academia, I guess, your PhD in neuroscience. I was looking back, $300 million budget. It was a pretty significant program.
Across all the programs. Yeah, I started 7 programs at DARPA and managed 9. Total.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, clearly in a defense, military, government context, it's not about commercial returns and exits and TAMs. Right. But when you look back, did you learn a lot that you still apply today as a VC investor?
Yes. So, everybody, the interesting thing is some program managers do go back. So there's always this part of you that's like, well, I could go back. Right. And if so, like, what did I learn? Right. And it was actually the commercialization piece that was the biggest piece that I learned, because knowing the speed of technology now and the sources of capital and things like that, I wish in the before times, my earlier me, I wish I had baked in more commercial milestones alongside the technical milestones, so that, when the company sort of entered what we call, lovingly call in the US system, the valley of death, right? They would have had some stepping stones to the point of looking at commercialization and potentially even, sales or revenue or things like that. The thing that I've taken from my DARPA days now into venture investing is sort of that laser focus on what is really the hardest technical or scientific, or like what's the nugget of the thing that needs to be true in order for, this company or this opportunity or this technology to be successful. So it really gave me that sort of like laser focus on those types of things. Technical milestones alone are not, enough to, support a venture-backed company. So that's, sometimes where the separation is between things that have had some government funding, have a lot of technical progress, but may not be particularly mature from the company perspective. And so combining those two insights, I think, have hopefully helped me make good decisions. So
great stuff. Okay, look, let's move out of DARPA. You move into the commercial world. You're an entrepreneur, a founder. Move to the investor side. We'll jump towards the kind of Satori era and the emergence of the neurotech sector. And you've been very much at the front and center of that journey and the development of the sector of a whole. So let's sort of ease the audience in terms of the macro environment. I hear terms, the neuroscience economy, the neurotech sector. We use the brain data economy. I don't know. Again, I'm not sure if we're the only people that use that term, but do you have a preferred nomenclature? And where does it start and where does it stop in terms of definitions in your view?
Interesting. So I would say there are probably two pretty active, definitions that are out there now. One is probably the more, maybe a little bit more growing, but nuclear around neurotechnology itself, right? Mm-hmm. And so in that case, talking about using some type of hardware, some type of data processing, some type of, interaction with the brain, whether that's invasive or non-invasive, or even maybe just through some sort of inference or physiology, to really try to capture something about the state of the individual, the function or thought process of the individual, or to modulate that individual, right? So I think the neurotechnology bubble is pretty big, but generally I assume it involves some type of hardware, interaction with the human. There's a much larger term that folks are sort of working with now at the international level that's around the brain capital economy, which is inclusive of the things that we've talked about, but then expands it to worker skills training and the workplace environment and how brain health long-term in populations is beneficial for, world economies, right? Like, so really like that's a really big umbrella, right? But it's been embraced quite a bit on the international stage because it's less sort of technically specific and more about really this human capital, this brain capital, that we have and what it means for the future. And so that's been a really interesting piece. And then if you want to pull on the little thread of the brain data economy, I think that's pretty nascent still. Okay. It's been interesting to see, obviously the interest in building foundational models of the brain, where that might get us. I don't think anyone knows of the endpoint, of that right now, but I think that there's a greater and greater interest in brain data, not only for the uses that we've talked about, clinical uses and human performance uses, but as it may add to AI itself. And what does that, how does real human brain data inform, the foundational models that are being built now? So.
Sure. Which opens a Pandora's box of ethical, regulatory, data privacy-esque questions, which we may touch on later in the conversation, Amy. But one more question on the market, and then we will get into Satori and your kind of investment philosophy. But again, obviously, the clue is on the tin. You're called Satori Neuro. You are a specialist fund that invests only in neurotech or the neuro economy. A lot of the big VC, I'll call them generalists, are more than dipping their toe in this sector, particularly with BCI, but not exclusively with BCI. Again, we are in the early innings of this neurotech revolution. Do you see, in 10 years' time, will this be a very defined class of VC? Do you see lots and lots of specialist funds emerging?
I do see, I think I'll play it both ways, I guess. I do think there's an advantage, for specialist funds, particularly right now. We're really able to come in at the earliest stages in companies. Most of us either have a science background or, we're operators in this space or, have PhDs or whatever. And so I do think there's, on the early stage side, certainly an advantage for specialist investors. I think as this, neurotech field, economy, ecosystem matures, I think we will continue to see later stage capital come in, understand now, the markets, the potential of neurotechnology, and that will bring in additional capital. I think you're starting to see this later stage capital come into brain computer interfaces because, as someone who's been in the space for a long time, we're in the engineering, implementation, clinical research phase, right? Like, to me, the science of brain computer interfaces, although there's always something to add and discover, like the fundamental elements of it have been demonstrated. And therefore, it's really about getting clinical systems approved and out into the world. I think that obviously attracts later stage capital as the risk calculus sort of, shifts. I will say, though, that I think that, obviously outcomes drive capital. So,
sure.
Exits and other things that, I would say the neurotechnology industry as a whole haven't yet benefited from are, yet to come. And that will also, I think, bring, additional later stage capital into the space. So
okay.
I'm bullish, I'm here, I'm bullish, but you know what, I mean, but we're also realists, right? Like, what needs to happen. And I
Sure.
would say just make one more point because I do make this point and I think it's, for any growth stage, later stage investors that are listening, the puzzling thing for some people is neurotechnology itself. It's a platform technology, right? It's been pigeonholed, I think, in medtech for quite some time. And, if I can tickle this part of your brain, what I mean? Like, it's such, like, if you can do one clinical indication, you can probably do 10 clinical indications. Now, of course, no investor wants you to do 10 clinical indications at one time. But I do always want to remind people of the, sort of expansiveness of neurotechnology and not just drive it down into, one clinical indication like you might for another med tech investment.
Yeah. No, great answer. And look, I'm bullish. I work in the space, as you know, but also, I mean, I've got sort of two sides of the coin. From a human point of view, the preponderance and the prevalence of mental health challenges alone, beyond all the other neurodegeneration, dementia, etc., there's just an enormous opportunity. It feels almost callous to turn that into, hey, the TAMs are really big because
I know.
There's a lot of human suffering. So there is a lot of good that can be done.
Yeah.
And as I say in my day job when I'm not podcasting here at Omniscient, we can build a great commercial business. Fantastic. Tick, capitalism, shareholders want that. But we can also build a very meaningful, purpose-driven, values-focused business. And I think that's a nice side of neurotech investing.
I do too. That's exactly how I feel as well.
Yeah. So let's get into Satori, and we'll sort of slice and dice it in a few different ways, but maybe kick off, just introduce a bit, high level, what the fund is, how long it's been around, and then maybe start in terms of stage. It sounds like you skew more towards pre-seed, seed, Series A versus growth, later stage, pre-IPO, but talk us through that.
Yeah, for sure. So Satori Neuro has been around for 3 years now, really with the focus of, like I said, working across the, mental health, neurotechnology, and brain health ecosystem. We are definitely interested, or I should say, I am interested in the ecosystem approach. I think there are a lot of different parts, in what I call the toolbox of how to look at this. And so we've been interested in therapeutics, and as I call it, like interesting therapeutics. We're working in psychedelic medicine and the adjacencies there, gut brain axis. I could spend all day talking about, neurotech and non-invasive neuromodulation and all the ways to, influence the brain through a variety of different energies. Really excited and, about precision neuroscience, precision psychiatry. How do we, think about building and implementing biomarkers in this space so individuals can get into the right treatment the first time? I think it's a really, if there's one core thing that I think is a bottleneck in this space, I think that's one of them. And then the fourth thing we look at is sort of infrastructure and access to care. And so, if you build all the best solutions and neurotechnologies in the world, how do people find them? How do they navigate to them? How do they pay for them? Where do they find them? And so we also invest in kind of the implementation of the neurotech, solutions themselves. And so I've done a couple of pre-seed, actually, I should say I've done a couple of pre-seed investments. Pre-seed's still a little bit early for me, just because a lot of times with science, it's
Sure.
with things that are very scientific, it's like it's at the slide stage, and you're like, a little early, but solidly seed, solidly Series A. And then we will do later stage investments, but they're typically through our co-investment fund, something that we might do, that we know a particular space really well and think our investors might be interested in. So, yeah, so it's been great. Yeah, we have, I think we have 19 companies in the portfolio now. So really kind of building up our ecosystem.
Hearing you say, using the term precision, my brain adds the word personalized precision medicine. And I look at what genomics has done over recent decades and, 25 years ago, a treatment for everyone for a disease. And now, look what we've done in sequencing the genome and very personalized oncology treatments. Do you see that as the ultimate promise of neurotech, personalized precision brain medicine?
Yes. I think neurotechnology has oncology envy, in terms of the direction that they've been able to come. Yeah, I think, one of the exciting things, like if I think about what I learned about the brain when I was in graduate school, right? And I was definitely coming from a molecular, like a lot of neuroscience very early on was very molecular, right? So it was all synaptic and you had to get down to the itty bitty bits and, like the cognitive neuroscientists were over here. The brain was a black, now those pieces have finally started to come together. And so the notion of looking at the brain from a systems perspective versus this bottom up, sort of synaptic soup, that I think I sort of grew up in the neuroscience community. I think that's leading us right to the notion of precision. Depression, anxiety, they're not monolithic conditions, right? There's probably 5 types of depression and 7 types, what I mean? And they're all going to be revealed in networks and processing in the ways that people, and so that's one of the things that I've been really excited about. I think the challenge has been, that kind of assessment isn't really part of our standard of care right now. And so, where does that fit in, right, has been a big question that I've been wrestling with, both as an investor and somebody who cares about this space, really deeply. Where can we get these inserted? And so thinking about that really hard right now, I think.
I think and hope in 20 years' time, we'll look back on the days where a single pill was given to anyone that said, loosely, I've got depression, where, as you say, there are multiple types, nuances, strains, will seem a bit absurd, but, that's the natural evolution of human beings and medicine.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and I think that's, definitely people are putting energy towards that. And how wonderful would it be to know that you're not going to respond to a particular medicine and not be given that medicine, and not have to, treatment resistant depression by definition is you failed three treatment, you know what I mean? Like, wow, what could we get rid of that? Could you get rid of not saying depression entirely, but like, would we get ourselves to a place where people might not be treatment resistant depression because they would get the best, most efficacious treatment the first time? So.
You mentioned, Amy, the term human flourishing earlier, which I love. Yes. In terms of your mandate and frankly, just your commercial focus, if I go to the highest level, problems of the brain, potential of the brain. So
Yeah.
depression, anxiety, PTSD, dementia,
Yeah.
Parkinson's, etc. Then you've got, memory, cognitive, agility, focus,
Yes.
meditation, the good stuff, just optimizing otherwise healthy people. Do you have, where's your current focus for this first fund?
We actually have a little bit of both. And we have a little bit of both because I love thinking about prevention, and I love thinking about going upstream on challenges. And so while there are very many clinical sort of questions and concerns right now that are right in front of us, and so have a lot of investment in, I would say addressing, problems that are front and center, there's a part of me that's like, wow, if we worked on social emotional learning in kids, right,
Absolutely.
and taught them how to handle their emotions, and what a complex world and environment we're living in right now. What if maybe a student wouldn't develop, had a little bit of that sort of training, wouldn't develop anxiety in middle school or as a teenager, or thinking about, oh my goodness, the things we've learned about neurodegeneration, right, and prevention and neuroinflammation and all the things around brain health, right? Like, I mean, if you ask the experts, they would tell you that 40% of neurodegeneration could theoretically be preventable by lifestyle interventions, right? Wow. Which include diet, exercise,
sure.
The things we're talking about, stress resilience and other things. And so I will always, think about things through that lens. So I hold both, right?
Sure.
And that could get us into a little bit of a spicier conversation around consumer neurotech and where is that headed? Because I think that's growing. It's been a a little slow engine that could, kind of getting up the slope. But I think you're seeing, because of people's interest. I mean, I'm wearing an Oura ring and I'm wearing my Apple Watch, and I'm so, I mean, I think we're in a realm where people are more and more interested in the data about themselves. And I think that is only going to continue. And as these platforms add more and more sophisticated sensors, I think people want more and more of that, right? And so that does become an opportunity to include, brain health and preventative measures and stress and resilience around that.
So just, I will pull on that thread. You've hooked me in on the consumer wearables and call it the unregulated wellness market.
Yes.
Calm, the meditation app, is an extreme example, but there's a ton of well-being offerings right now, which is great. Is that an area? Where's your line? Where would you stray to?
Well, I mean, so if the science is good, so I'm definitely driven by the scientific underpinnings, but I am interested in the consumer neurotech space. My personal bet has always been around sleep as probably the first crossover point, like real sticky crossover point between consumer neurotech and, maybe general wellness. And again, we're talking about things where people are now tracking their sleep with more precision, but they're pretty much open loop, right? It's like, congratulations, you had a bad night's sleep. We recommend you take it easy and go to bed early. That's like you're the behavior modification system in that in that example. And so, if there were a way to actually help people sleep better, modulate sleep, and things like that. So I've always said that I think sleep is at the top of that list. I will say, in my, spicier comment space, I do think that neuromodulation, and this is broadly taken, right? Like there are a lot of ways to modulate the brain, but we're talking about transcranial direct current stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation, low intensity focused ultrasound. I've seen some really cool photobiomodulation things, this past year, like the ability to modulate the human brain and modulate state in real time in a short enough time period that somebody can perceive it, I think will be a transformative moment for neurotech in general. So
I agree. On you mentioned a few subsectors. Also, the word platform has come up a couple of times in the conversation. Single indication, multi-indication.
Yeah.
Without being unkind to the biotech industry as a whole, so any biotech investors out there, just take this in good faith.
We still love you. Yeah, we still love you. Yeah.
There's always the sense of this is either a basis-loaded home run or you're striking out without, very little, hey, you're growing at 9% and paying dividends and it's a median outcome. So in terms of your philosophy in neurotech, are you always looking for that platform aspect as opposed to like single bet on a single piece of hardware for a single indication?
I love platforms.
You love platforms?
I'm a platform investor. I mean, I know, it's like you could just divide a room up, you have investors stand up and everybody sorts themselves into, I believe that working on something that fundamentally can approach multiple indications and multiple brain regions. And that's the way it works. You know what I mean? It seems self-evident to me. I know it's, those of us maybe who are not as deep into the field don't understand, the extensibility of some of these, both recording and stimulation, systems. And so I really think that that's, if we could really get people to wrap their heads around that, I think you'd see a lot more capital coming into this space.
Is that almost an investment mantra? You have to hold yourself disciplined towards that, however brilliant the founder and however much you love. Oh, wow, it's a single,
yes.
rainmaker shot at treatment-resistant depression. You have to say, no, it's just too risky because it's either huge success or complete failure. I need some hedge.
I tend not to invest in things that have a single shot.
Got it.
And that's also just, where I am in the market and size and other things like that, but that's definitely been my going in, sort of proposition. So
in terms of founders, I guess one of the upsides of your role, you must meet a ton of really interesting, smart, PhD, postdoctorates, entrepreneurs, etc., coming from different backgrounds, different angles. I shouldn't guess that there isn't a one-size-fits-all. Here's my checklist for what I look for in a founder, but have you seen any patterns of success or, again, just traits you look for when a founder walks in the door?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, this job is amazing, right? Because I do get to talk to all of these incredible founders. I do spend most of my day saying no. Which is very painful. But I do try to be, I'm one of those people that I try to be accessible and helpful. If I see a founder that I really like, I can't invest in that, but hey, let's continue the conversation. But I would say, especially as it relates to founders in the neurotech space and technical founders, they're going to be, they're certainly going to be subject matter experts in what they're pitching to you. And the question is, do they know what they don't know? And I don't need a founder to have every single trait or every single capability. If you're like, hey, I'm good at X, Y, and Z, and I suck at Y, that's why I got a co-founder, to join me, or I brought this person into the team in the C-suite. That's really, that sort of self-awareness of what you're good at, what you're not good at, what it takes to, get some of these technologies truly out of the lab and into, MVP and then, hopefully commercialization. It's a lot longer path than people think it is. And so you want to have your A team, sort of with you. I'm on a lot of boards. I do a lot of advising. Coachability is super helpful, if you can really, be, I try to be really clear and authentic with people. And if you can give people clear and authentic feedback around, hey, maybe a spot where they need to grow, or maybe they should have handled a situation differently with the board, or, if you can have that sort of conversation with a founder, you're just going to, you're going to have investors and advisors around you that are truly, truly on your side and, will always be, sort of have your best interest and the company's best interest at heart. And so that's kind of the relationship that I try. I have met a lot of founders who are all VCs and all investors are evil. And therefore, I need to protect myself against, and no kidding. It's a whole range of humans out there, right? So like, yes, probably some people are not great, but I don't put founders into one big lumpy bucket, and I don't think founders should put investors and VCs into one lumpy bucket. Like, it's your job to interview us just as much as it's our job to interview you. I think it's a two-way street. And do you want to work together and build something great? And if you can find that, I think it's magical. So,
no, I love that answer, Amy. I can really relate to it. I've always thought listening is one of the most underrated business skills. Everyone wants to walk into a meeting and dominate and have all the answers, and I'm the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
But the longer I'm in business, I'm going to kind of sound like a real oldie now, but I just think humility is such an important trait as well. And that's what you're saying there.
Yeah.
Knowing when you don't know the answers, putting your hand up and saying, hey, I know, I'm a great science researcher. I just need help on my go-to-market strategy or my regulatory strategy. And it's such an important skill I now see as I look back on my career. But I guess, again, without generalizing, are many founders you meet, younger, less experienced, maybe don't naturally have that humility?
Yeah. I think it comes with experience, It
does.
If you've had somebody who's run a lab for a decade and has been through a lot of humans, they have a different perspective than somebody who may have just rolled out of a PhD program or rolled out of an MBA or something like that and had less, the school of hard knocks, as we like to call it. So.
Yeah. So, Amy, 1 hour on the clock, and I want to be respectful of your time. Just a couple of final questions.
Absolutely.
I do want to just unpack BCI a little bit. But
Absolutely.
if I, again, zoom up on BCI, if I look back on the kind of the evolution of neurotech, and you had open loop, from DBS, a chip in the brain, or non-invasive stimulation. You talked about TMS, focused ultrasound. It's kind of one direction, and huge progress and some amazing offerings out there. And even that alone is tremendous progress. But then you look at the promise of BCI closed loop, and we go from like editing to rewiring and, fundamentally changing the brain. Again, park the sort of ethical, there's a huge topic there, but
sure.
Does BCI feel like almost the natural, that's where we're all heading. That's the kind of natural end state that if we can crack, I'll use the term very broadly, BCI, it subsumes a lot underneath it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you're getting to a key point, right? Which is like these pieces, these stages, right? So it's like, at first it was just read, and now with neuromodulation, we've kind of got a little bit of right? And are we evolving toward this like read-write space, which would be very interesting, right? And I think, part of the folks who are really looking at BCI from maybe a different, like a less clinical angle, but more of a decoding the brain in general angle, right? Can we upload our memories? Can we upload our thoughts? Right. I think even as a former DARPA program manager who, forecasts things out, like, I think we're still a little bit far from all of us, able-bodied humans having an implantable BCI in order to, sort of interface with these systems. I really do think the first and most appropriate use of those systems is for clinical outcomes. But
sure.
But also, I think folks who have the systems and who are the vanguards, right, and using these systems are probably going to create some pretty cool things that they could do with them, right? Like, once we get them out into the wild, I do think we're going to find some really, sort of interesting things about, the brain and interacting with the brain in that sort of very intimate way that hasn't really been done in numbers or at scale before. And we're living in a big data world, right? And so I think we are going to learn some things about the brain that maybe just blow us away that may accelerate that. But I do think that we're certainly going to start with the clinical pieces first and then, kind of move our way up the chain. But I know folks are very interested in, sort of decoding these fundamental elements of human consciousness.
Yeah. Just on a human level, it's mind-blowingly, sci-fi-esque what the promise of BCI is. But even if you just believe in the sort of efficient market hypothesis and follow the money and the flow of capital into neurotech, and as we've talked about, it is a new-ish emerging sector.
Yeah.
Every slice and dice of what I look at, BCI is the most dominant number, share of pie. So you can, some of that you could say is the Neuralink Elon Musk, PR effect in a good way. But clearly people aren't going to just invest because Elon's in. And again, even this week, there was another multi-$100 million BCI raise. It's hard to keep up with. So the money seems to be saying this is the end game. This is where the big prize is.
Well, I think it's because maybe I'll tie it back to, where we started the conversation. Like the brain is the source of our thoughts, behaviors, emotions, and as we're entering this AI world, like it seems like understanding the human is pretty important, and that's going to be the source of understanding humans and maybe the way that, humans will interact with machines in the future. And so I do think that people are waking up to the, sort of fundamental foundational aspect of the brain. It's less of a black box, than it used to be, and more a source of information and data, which is, as you say, simultaneously exciting and simultaneously terrifying.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Look, final question linked to BCI. Well, I think linked to BCI again. As an emerging sector, as a venture capital investor, I assume you've got a kind of 10-year-ish time horizon for your fund. You'll be looking for exits. There'll be some trade sales. But do you think a blockbuster IPO, however you define that, is that kind of what we need? This officially puts us on the map. And could it be Neuralink?
Sure. I'm all for blockbuster IPOs in the neurotech space, just to, if anybody's checking on. No, I mean, I think, so two things. I think blockbuster IPOs, and I think we have enough really interesting pieces circulating in the overall ecosystem. I think there could also be some big capital raises that combine some elements together that could be very compelling. So, again, companies have sort of been, one indication, or at least, indication bubble, and one technology or fundamental technology. What if you started combining, implanted BCI companies with, neuromodulation pieces with something else? What if you made a super neurotech conglomerate? That's also something that's on my bingo card. So, yes.
Okay. Amy, I could genuinely talk for hours. This is not yet a Joe Rogan-esque 3-hour conversation, so I will draw it to
no one did
a close.
Any neuroplastogens during the filming of this podcast. So
correct. But look, thank you very much for joining the show, and I genuinely mean thank you for everything you're doing for the sector as a whole. I think we first met a couple of years ago. You are the ultimate connector. You're involved with BrainMind. You're involved with so many other industry bodies. You're trying to advance the collective good. I was thinking, if ever there's a Mount Rushmore for the neurotech sector, your face is etched in granite in slot one. No, but look, I think you're doing a lot in the space. Good luck with Satori Neuro, fund, you. But thank you for your broader contribution to the sector.
It's truly my pleasure. It is truly my pleasure. I want to make this grow for all of us and the patients and everybody else. So thanks for having me. I really do appreciate it.
No problem. Look, before I let you go, where do you want to send people that may want to follow what you're doing online and learn more about Satori Neuro?
I'm on Substack. I have the New and Human Flourishing newsletter. So that would be a super fun way to follow me and kind of get my latest insights and updates. So really easy to find on Substack. So
great stuff. Amy, thank you so much for joining the Business of Neurotech podcast.
My pleasure. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to the show. For more information on the podcast, individual show notes, and all the links about where you can find the show, please visit businessofneurotech.com. We look forward to seeing you on a future episode.